Look, it's no secret that the Godfather trilogy is the greatest and most influential film trilogy of all time. You probably can't name a more iconic film series. I can give you a whole list why this is the case, but you probably already know why. And here's the thing, although these films stand out in terms of acting, cinematography, and so on, what really puts the Godfather trilogy in a completely different league compared to the other iconic films is the unbelievable links it has to real-life events. But even in terms of its themes, specifically that of power, wealth, capitalism, and family, to celebrate the film's 50th anniversary. In this video, we've uncovered some of the craziest and most interesting real-life connections and facts that you probably didn't know about the Godfather trilogy. And I'm gonna be completely honest with you, a lot of these actually left me absolutely shocked. So I have a challenge for you. At the end of this video, comment how many you genuinely didn't know and how many you did. And we'll continue the conversation in the comments. Let's begin. In one of the most iconic scenes of all time, following Michael's assassination of Virgil Sollozzo and Captain McCluskey, he secretly smuggled away to the village where his father was from, the town of Corleone, Sicily. Now here's what's really interesting, and something that most people won't believe. Corleone is actually a real town in Sicily. However, here's where it gets a bit more interesting. Although they were filmed in Sicily, none of these scenes were actually filmed in the real Corleone. Here's what happened. The real Corleone is located here. However, all the filming locations are located across this area. The main reason being that the real Corleone was too developed and was not really what Coppola was looking for. For example, the real Bar Vitelli is located here in the small town of Savoca, and many other scenes were filmed in the town of Forza d'Agro. And I'll let you guess the rest of the scenes that were filmed there. Another example is this scene, where Michael and Kay are supposed to be in the railway station of Bagheria, located here. However, this scene was actually filmed in Taormina railway station, which is actually here. Regardless of where the filming took place, actual filming in Sicily gave the film such an authentic feel, and thanks to director Francis Coppola and his team, they masterfully managed to capture the beauty and complexity of such a scenic and historic land.
That's a Sicilian message. It means Luca Brasi sleeps with the fishes.
Now this one is simply mind-blowing. The character of Luca Brasi in the film was someone not to be trifled with. He was an incredibly intimidating figure, and many had to learn the hard way not to mess with him. Coppola cast Lenny Montagna as Luca Brasi after Joe Colombo visited the set. Montagna was the gangster's actual bodyguard. He was a former pro wrestler, yet still was so nervous about acting in a scene with Marlon Brando. He botched every take, but Coppola then turned it to his advantage. He added a snippet of footage of Montagna rehearsing his lines to make it seem like Luca was nervous about taking up the Godfather's time on the day of his daughter's wedding. Brasi is the guy who held a gun to the bandleader's head while Vito Corleone assured him that either his brains or his signature would be on a contract, releasing Johnny Fontane from fronting the band, which is another similarity he had with his real-life counterpart, Willie Moretti. Willie Moretti was a notorious underboss of the Genovese crime family and a cousin of the family boss, Frank Costello. Willie Moretti was reportedly the friend that got Sinatra out of his bad contract with band leader Tommy Dorsey. This is his most direct connection with the character Luca Brasi, who does the same for Johnny Fontane. Moretti was not known to be as vicious or sociopathic as Brasi was in Puzo's retelling, but the two met the same end because of their bosses. Moretti was executed for becoming too talkative, and the killing was seen as a necessary component to loosening the grip that his cousin Frank Costello had on the Genovese family, and left room for the Gambino family to take charge. Likewise, Brasi's death weakened the Corleone family and opened them up to exploitation from the Tattaglia and Barzini families. In real life, people were more nervous about being around Moretti. He was erratic, unpredictable, and wild. When Moretti told the KEFAUVER organized crime hearings that he didn't carry a membership card that says Mafia on it, the mob figure also had a big mouth. Willie was shot in the face out of respect in New Jersey. Vito Genovese called Moretti's execution a mercy killing.
I never knew about Godfather.
The Senate hearings in The Godfather 2, which forced Michael to testify about the Mafia, were based on the real-life congressional hearings known as the KEFAUVER hearings that occurred in the 1950s and 1960s that brought mobsters Costello and Vito Genovese before the public. Most notably, mobster Joe Valachi offered testimony, but not as a devoted mobster, but rather as a government witness. He was the first Mafia member to appear in a public setting and acknowledge the organization's existence, which ultimately initiated its downfall. In The Godfather 2, Michael travels to Cuba to forge a major deal with Hyman Roth and his associates with the Cuban government. This historic deal would propel the Corleone family and all participants into a new level. opening completely new opportunities they could have only dreamed of, as Hyman states to Michael.
Just one small step, looking for a man that wants to be president of the United States, and having the cash to make it possible. Michael, we're bigger than U.S. Steel.
A deal would allow them to conduct their operations in Cuba freely without any interference from the government authorities. In return, they are to provide generous payments to the President Batista. This was a major storyline in the film and definitely one of the most intriguing, as it was brilliantly written, directed, and acted by all those involved. But what elevates this storyline and theme, setting it apart from all the others, is its basis in reality. The Havana Conference did indeed occur in 1946, where all the major mob dons and leading figures met in Havana, Cuba, to discuss important mob policies, rules, and business interests. It was reportedly organized by the notorious mob boss Charles Lucky Luciano, as well as Meyer Lansky, who gathered the bosses from all over the U.S., from New York, New Jersey, Buffalo, Chicago, New Orleans, and Florida, at the Hotel Nacional de Cuba. Some of the most notable attendees include Frank Costello, Vito Genovese, Anthony Accardo, Joseph Bonanno, Giuseppe Profaci, and Albert Anastasia, all who were still considered as the most influential and powerful figures in organized crime and mafia history. Speaking of Cuba, here's a bonus fact. All these scenes were actually filmed in Santo Domingo, the Dominican Republic. They still managed to brilliantly capture what and how Cuba would have looked like at that time. Alongside all the real-life mobsters and figures that Don Vito was based on, director Francis Coppola had modeled some of the more subtle mannerisms of the Don on his uncle. He actually does make an appearance in Part 2, and well, you can definitely see the similarities. Johnny Ola, played by Dominic Chianese, who also played Uncle Junior in The Sopranos, was Hyman Roth's go-between to the Corleone family, as modeled on Vincent Allo, who had close links to Meyer Lansky. He was the one who would pass Lansky's messages to the Luciano family. When Frankie Five Angels goes to negotiate with the Rosado brothers, well, let's say he just didn't expect what would happen next. The attempt on his life by the Rosado brothers is actually inspired by the murder attempt on Larry Gallo, who was garroted in a bar during a sit-down and narrowly survived when a policeman intervened. Now, there's a lot of debate on the truth behind the real inspiration behind the character of the Godfather himself, and it's actually a lot more interesting than what most people think. Portrayed by Marlon Brando, character of Vito was actually a combination of a few mob bosses. Let's start with the real-life mobster Joe Profaci. Both had an olive oil business to serve as a front for his illegal activities and kept his circle small and intimate. Then we have Carlo Gambino, where both have had a reputation for being modest, under-the-radar figures, while still maintaining an aura of power. However, the Godfather character is most similar to real-life mobster Frank Costello, who was strategic, reasonable, and known as the prime minister of the mob because of his wise counsel. Like Costello, Don Vito used his diplomatic skills and connections to influential businessmen, judges, politicians, and police to keep his power in place, and also discourage his underlings from getting involved in the narcotics business. We have a full video exploring the strange rise of Frank Costello. His life was quite intense, taking several dramatic turns. I highly recommend you watch it after this video. Speaking of Costello, Don Vito Corleone possesses a very memorable and distinct voice, in which Marlon Brando brilliantly based it on the real-life mobster Frank Costello.
I'm gonna make him an offer, Captain.
One of the standout characters in Part 1 who really left an impression, even though he didn't really have much screen time, was none other than the man who built Las Vegas, the casino don, Moe Greene. Portrayed by Alex Rocco, Moe Greene had a huge, brash personality who helped bring life to the Las Vegas scene. In real life, mobster Bugsy Siegel did just that. As a hitman for the East Coast organization Murder Incorporated, Siegel moved out west and helped build Vegas, operating the luxury casino The Flamingo. Siegel had no qualms about showing off and circulating in the celebrity crowd, and Greene expressed those same characteristics. Siegel and Greene also met similar fates when a fusillade of bullets was shot through their bodies. Notably, each man received a bullet in their eye sockets. However, Siegel was killed for stealing money from the mob, while Greene's disrespect for the Corleones hastened his end. In The Godfather, we meet the heads of the five families during the meeting held to end the war. The five families in The Godfather were the Corleone family, headed by Vito Corleone, also the most powerful. And then you have the Barzini, Tattaglia, Cuneo, and Stracci crime families. These five families are indeed based on the real five crime families of New York, which were the Maranzano, Profaci, Mangano, Luciano, and Galliano families, but later known as Genovese, Gambino, Lucchese, Colombo, and Bonanno crime families. Each boss and his family draws various characteristics from the real-life New York families, but there doesn't seem to be any direct association between one family and the other. For example, the Tattaglia family in The Godfather and the real-life Gambino family were both known for their business in prostitution. However, boss Philip Tattaglia is said to be based more on Tommy Lucchese than on Gambino boss Carlo Gambino, who actually more resembles Don Vito. But similar to the other characters in the film, each Don is a combination of several real-life figures. In addition to the five families, the commission, or the governing body of the Mafia, is another familial concept presented in The Godfather that had a strong basis in fact. Both in the film and in real life, the commission is responsible for settling disputes between families and approving new members and bosses. Only the commission has the power to remove a boss from power. In real life, it was Lucky Luciano who formed the commission in 1931 following the Castellamarese War. Likewise, in The Godfather, Vito Corleone formed the commission to oversee all mafia activities across the United States, also in 1930. Emilio Barzini, played by actor Richard Conti, was based on notorious mobster Vito Genovese. Don Barzini was less brutal and more eloquent than Vito Genovese, but his influence is most certainly there. Both were not ones to hold on to all the principles of Cosa Nostra. The non-traditionalist mobster openly defied some of the major mafia laws, from allegedly engaging in the heroin and cocaine trade, ordering hits on other bosses, such as he put on the boss of the Luciano crime family, Frank Costello. They shared a mercenary nature and the ambition to want to be known as the boss of bosses, where some of the other bosses tried to rule with honor and traditions. Barzini and Genovese both preferred to do things their own way. Ultimately, the culture they disavowed was holding the fabric of their families together, and their refusal to abide by it led to their downfall. In one of the most memorable scenes in The Godfather, Michael makes a pivotal shift from being a law-abiding citizen to turning into a full-fledged gangster. Michael agreed to represent the Corleone family and have a sit-down with two of his father's enemies at a restaurant to settle their issues. But as you know, Michael went in with different intentions, and I'm sure you remember what happened next. This iconic scene was inspired by one of the most notorious public executions in mob history. In 1931, famed mobster Lucky Luciano, who was determined to usurp power from his mentor and boss, Giuseppe Joe Masseria. And here's how he did it. Lucky asked him out to lunch at a restaurant in Coney Island. When Luciano took off to the men's room, Masseria met his untimely end when he was gunned down by a group of hitmen. Hyman Roth is introduced in The Godfather Part 2 and is based on Meyer Lansky, also known as the mob's accountant. His partnership with Don Vito mimics that of the relationship that Meyer Lansky had with Lucky Luciano and Frank Costello, who also happened to be the primary inspirations for the character of the Don. Lansky was a financial genius and was instrumental in aiding the formation of the National Crime Syndicate in the United States. Both in real life and in The Godfather, many big names among the families greatly valued his counsel. Just as Roth's real-life counterpart realized the need for Bugsy Siegel's execution, Lansky understood that he must agree to the assassination and not turn against the mob. In fact, the line, "We're bigger than U.S. Steel," uttered by Roth in the film, has long been attributed to Lansky.
Michael, we're bigger than U.S. Steel.
However, while Roth was shot by a Corleone operative, Lansky lived a long life in South Florida. Gangster Meyer Lansky was an associate of the commission since its foundation, a friend of Luciano since he stood up to two shakedown attempts. Roth helped to set up the National Crime Syndicate and Murder Incorporated. Lansky arranged for Luciano to go into exile in Sicily instead of doing jail time in exchange for securing the Brooklyn shipyard during World War II. Lansky also counseled Frank Costello. Lee Strasberg, who played Hyman Roth, was personally complimented by Lansky on his performance. Everything from his mannerisms to the subtlest of signs captured the personality of his real-life counterpart. Now, this one is quite problematic. There is one particular character that has by far the most striking resemblance to a real-life figure, which has to be the character Johnny Fontaine, Don Vito's godson. The similarities between the character of Johnny Fontaine, played by Al Martino, and singer Frank Sinatra were so conspicuous that Sinatra was purportedly irked by it. In the film, Fontaine reaches out to Vito to help him get out of a contract he was unhappy with. Desperate to rescue his fading career, Fontaine decides to go into acting and gets cast in a big movie. A move that Sinatra made when he starred in From Here to Eternity, which subsequently reinvigorated his popularity. Interestingly, Coppola briefly contemplated the idea of casting Sinatra as Vito. Likewise, in real life, Sinatra was able to remove himself from his contract with the help of his mob connections. In The Godfather, the Corleones discovered one of their own was conspiring against Michael's ascent to power. At first, the suspicion is directed to Clemenza, mainly due to the fact that he was quite obviously not happy with Michael's first few decisions, and quite vocally made his disappointment known. But the family soon finds out it's actually the quiet, stalwart Salvatore Tessio, played by Abe Vigoda, who was behind the attempted assassination of Michael at a mob summit. Real-life gangster Gaspar di Gregorio was the inspiration behind Tessio's character. When Joseph Bonanno tried to transfer his power over to his son, Di Gregorio felt wronged and began to devise a campaign against the boss, which newspapers then dubbed the Banana War. As Tessio did in the film, Di Gregorio tried to pull a meeting together between the two factions with the intention of assassinating the Bonannos. Unlike Di Gregorio's jealousy and lust for power, though, Tessio wanted Michael removed because he just didn't think he was capable of saving the family. And so it came down to a simple business decision. While Di Gregorio failed to kill his rivals and died in obscurity, Tessio was taken for a ride and executed for his betrayal. A major plot point in the films was the fact that Don Vito did not want Michael to get involved with the illegal side of the family business. Similarly, mobster Joseph Bonanno didn't want his son Bill to get into the family business either, rather encouraging Bill to live on the straight and narrow. He even got his son to go to law school, just like Vito had his son Michael do. Despite his father's wishes, Michael, like Bill, unfortunately found his way into the mob life. However, that's where the common thread ends. In real life, Bill's personality was more like Michael's older brother, Fredo. He was known to be ostentatious, attention-seeking, leeching off his family's wealth, and never received the respect he so badly wanted from his father's men.
Hello, fellas. Everybody's here.
Mo Green was brilliantly portrayed by the late Alex Rocco and was based on the notorious mobster Bugsy Siegel. We all know the story behind Mo Green and his real-life counterpart Bugsy. However, what very few actually know is actor Alex Rocco's real connection to the Mafia. In 1961, he was a suspect in a murder case, but was never proven. He did spend a year in jail for bookmaking. Rocco was allegedly an associate of the Winter Hill Gang, a Boston-area organized crime group. Allegedly, an unwanted advance towards Rocco's girlfriend actually sparked the Boston Irish gang war of the 1960s. Shortly after these events, he left it behind and moved to California and became an actor. In 1995, Alex Rocco attended the former crime boss Joseph Bonanno's 90th birthday celebration.
How are you, Mo?
Mo Green's name is believed to be derived from the names of Mo Sedway and Gus Greenbaum, who were close associates of Meyer Lansky, the model for Hyman Roth. As well as Bugsy Siegel, Mo Green also shares a lot in common with Mo Dalitz, who was referred to as Mr. Las Vegas and is credited with turning the city from a layover for GIs to a major tourist destination alongside. Michael's papal recognition and charity funds may well be inspired by Joe Profaci's quest for papal approval. Like Michael, Profaci donated to Catholic charities and had a group of leading Italian Americans petition the Pope to confer a knighthood on him, being known as a son of Sicily, who they said had become a benefactor and patron to the Italian American community. However, sadly for Profaci, his dream of papal approval was shattered when the Brooklyn District Attorney Miles McDonald protested to the Vatican that Profaci was a leading racketeer, extortionist, murderer, and mafia leader. Genco Abbandando was Don Vito Corleone's first consigliere, the Don's right-hand man and closest friend. Interestingly, Genco is believed to be based on John Tartamella, who was the consigliere to Joseph Bonanno, the boss of the Bonanno crime family. He was a very well-respected figure of Cosa Nostra. Also, Genco possesses the same surname of Frank Abbandando, a notorious hitman of Murder Incorporated. In The Godfather Part 2, the young Vito Corleone escapes from Sicily to a new life in America. In real life, notorious mob boss Frank Costello moved with his parents to America for a better life. Another interesting similarity that Vito and Frank share is the fact they had their names changed after moving to America. Frank Costello was actually named Francesco Castiglia. However, he changed it later on to what some say was to sound more American. In Vito's case, it was more of a mistake made by officials. So how did you do? Comment below how many you did and didn't know. Did we miss any? I'm sure there are still many more we didn't include, and you might know some more, as you've proven time and time again. So please comment below. I'm very curious to see what you guys have. Once again, thank you for watching and thank you for being part of the Culture Mafia. If you enjoyed this video, click on this video next.